Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending Improving's August 19th virtual Lunch and Learn. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make the session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I'm proud to present Robyn Fuentes, who is Director of Consulting at Improving. Today, Robyn will be sharing a webinar entitled Trust, the Secret Ingredient in Scrum. The floor is all yours, Robyn.
Thank you, Shervin. Yes, as Shervin mentioned, I will be talking about Trust and Scrum, but a little bit about me before we get started. I am a Director of Consulting here at Improving. If you haven't met me, I would give you my email at the end of this presentation. I would love to get connected with any of you. I am a Christian. I am a full stack developer. Been working in the Angular and Java world for quite some time. I've also been dabbling in React and some other front-end technologies with a specialization in UX, and obviously have come to nerd out on Scrum and Trust and the different elements that go into that. And I like to pride myself in being a lifelong learner. I believe that the best leaders are learners and the best developers are learners. And so that is in a nutshell who I am. And we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So first and foremost, for those of you who maybe aren't super familiar with Scrum, this is the Scrum process. You have a product backlog, you have a sprint backlog. A sprint is typically 2 to 4 weeks of iterative work, and then you, on a daily basis, you meet together as a Scrum team to discuss what you've accomplished in the day before. At the end of any given sprint, you'll then demonstrate your end product or your deliverable, your iterative progress to your stakeholders, and then you continue to cycle like that through any project. This has been a process that has worked and been implemented in tons of different organizations and is really widespread across, especially the IT industry, but also in others, and has been shouted from the rooftops to be really successful. So many managers have come and heard about this and been like, wait, so this is something that if I implement this in my team and I follow all of these processes, everything will just work. People will become efficient, all the people problems will go away, and we'll solve all of it. And then it all falls apart. But I did all the things. I did the sprint ceremonies. I had product backlog grooming and retrospective and Scrum and all of these things. And oh my goodness, why is this falling apart? Why is there strife on the team? Why aren't we able to make our commitments? Why are we not getting things done? Well, as you might know, Scrum is based on 3 pillars, and it's adaptation, inspection, and transparency. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't solve a people problem with the process. Now, specifically, that doesn't mean you don't use processes. That just means that when you have issues with inter-team strife, low morale, low trust, all of these things, fixing it with processes isn't going to ultimately solve the problem. You really have to fix the people problem with addressing the people. And Scrum does this. Scrum introduces Scrum values where they talk about courage and focus and commitment and respect and openness. And all of these are great values. And you look at each one of them and they all have a common thread where they really base on the people. And that's awesome. That matches perfectly what I'm saying here. And then you take a little bit of a closer look and you could still hit all of these values. And for some reason, in terms of the metaphor of creating a soup, the soup doesn't quite taste right. So when you're making a soup, you genuinely want to have the best ingredients at hand, right? The best vegetables that don't have all kinds of chemicals in it. You want the best meat from the best cows or chickens, or if you're vegetarian, you don't put meat in, whatever. But you want to have the best ingredients. So even with all of the values and all the best ingredients and all the best processes, there still is something that is kind of missing. And so what I'm going to talk to you about is what I've identified that thing to be is trust. Now, what exactly is trust? I think you can go around and to 1,000 people and get 1,000 different definitions of what they believe trust to be, whether it's honesty or whether it's consistency or being able to predict what they're doing. But I'm going to go back to Merriam-Webster's definition of trust, and that is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. Now, that's a lot of words. But I think in general, when you think about it and you think through those different words, it does pretty much encompass what you would think of as trust. So I think it's a great definition. Now, if you break down these words, you got belief. Belief is a perception. So perception is very important. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we're going to put that into a bucket. And then you got reliability, truthability, and strength. Now, strength in particular is an odd one. And when I think about strength, I like to think about a rope, where a rope will have the ability to tie around something, but it also needs to be strong enough to handle the task at hand. That applies to people in some ways and doesn't in others. But you take reliability, truth, and ability, and you can really boil them down into character and competency. Now, to think about character and competency in terms of trust, I like to ask people what they look for in a service provider. Like, say I'm going to a doctor. Now, I could have a doctor that is thoroughly competent at what they do, but has terrible bedside manners. I think of Dr. House when I think about this. And while I might trust him to get the job done right, there's going to be limits to that trust, right? Similarly, if I were to go and maybe somebody has great character but terrible competencies, you're probably going to say, I like you a lot, but I'm going to go find another service provider. Thank you very much. So you really need both of these elements. Now, to talk through those and to provide language to those two elements, I'm going to base a lot of this information on content from The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. R. Covey. And so you haven't read this book, you don't have access to it. It's like $7 to $9 on Amazon. Give it a buy and spend some time to read it. The first third of the book goes through the concepts and talks about the fundamentals, and then it goes chapter by chapter through different cores of credibility and behaviors and trust. Now, the really cool thing about this book is that it provides language by which to talk about it. So if you've read the book and I've read the book and we're sitting here talking about trust, it gives us an ability to come together on a common ground to better explore the concepts and to dive deeper into it and ultimately get better at it personally, which ultimately will make our teams better and will help processes like Scrum work to the advantage that we really want to be going towards here. So I'm going to dive into the concepts of this book. There are 4 cores of credibility and 13 behaviors, and we're going to walk through what it all means and how to apply it in the Scrum process and how it all ties back to the values in Scrum. So to dive right in, first and foremost, we have a tree. Now, Covey has this tree in the book where it talks about the integrity and the intent, capabilities, and results, which are split up into competence and character, as I mentioned before, with integrity being the roots. Now, the interesting thing about integrity is I find that there's often a misconception in integrity, where if I see you doing something that I don't see as morally good, I often apply judgment of lack of integrity to that person. But that's actually not what the definition of integrity is. Integrity means congruence with your own value system and your actions. You essentially walk your talk. And so if I don't know what your value system is, I can't judge your integrity. And so it's an interesting mental leap there where its roots, it's underneath the ground, it's hidden, where you can see the fruits of it. You can see where the source of the food of the results come from based on the fruit and based on whether the apple is poison in this sense. But from immediate view, it's often not visible. Additionally, what I like to think about here in roots is that it's your foundation. It's a thing that the bigger and the deeper your roots are, the stronger your tree is going to be overall. And when the storm of life happens and it blows around your tree, a tree with no roots is going to fall over. Similarly, think about, a salesperson that doesn't have integrity. Maybe they're telling you that the car has perfect mechanical soundness, no issues. You decide to trust him, buy the car, and it breaks down. Not only are you going to not buy from that salesperson again, but you're probably going to warn other people away from it too. And then when something like COVID hits and sales get even harder to have, then that storm of life will knock down that tree. Then we go into intent, which is also character-based, and it's the core, where sometimes it's visible and sometimes it's not. The coolest thing about intent is that you can make it visible. I would argue that if you're running a meeting, that there isn't an instance where you don't want to start with your intent. We are meeting today because. Now, the cool thing about intent is it helps guide not only your own conversation and how you come across to people, but it can also bring people who assume your intent is over here. So saying what your intent is not is sometimes very beneficial, but saying what your intent is almost always beneficial, if that makes sense. And so it's the core of your intent. It breeds the results. If you've never done the 5 whys exercise, I highly recommend looking that up. It's an exercise by which you can figure out what your core intent is. So, for example, if I am constantly looking at the next thing in front of me and figuring out how to solve that problem without ever taking a step back and looking at the big picture, I can back myself into a corner. But if I stop before the next behavior and I say, wait, is this really matching up with my core intent, with my ultimate goal agenda here? So in terms of Scrum, that could be, hey, the stakeholder brings up a problem. There's a bug in production. Oh no, let's go fix that. Well, what if the problem that you're working on in the sprint is actually more beneficial to the end user than fixing that bug? Getting lost in the next most critical or top of mind item can lead you to not actually being able to deliver the result of the sprint. So intent and figuring out how to create the processes to make the intent visible and to act in that regard is the point here. And then we talk about into more of the competency areas. We have both capabilities and results. Capabilities being the branches. And I love the analogy of branches because each branch is a different size. You can be crazy capable in this area and have a little bit of experience in this other area. And there's no judgment in this, but an acknowledgement that you don't need to trust one person in every single regard, and no one person's going to have every single branch of the same size. It's a very personable, unique aspect to it. And finally, you have results, and the results are the fruits of your tree. They're your resume-driven thing. Anything that you can write down as the accomplishments, not activities, but accomplishments is what we're looking at here. Now, I'm going to pivot from this, and these 4 cores are part of the language I was talking about, but then I'm going to pivot talking about the 13 behaviors. And in the 13 behaviors, I'm going to relate in the back, as I mentioned earlier, to the values of Scrum. But I want to keep in mind before we do that if you haven't acknowledged the 4 cores of credibility on a personal level, if you haven't taken a look at yourself and looked at your own integrity, your own intent, capabilities, and results before trying to act in these behaviors, oftentimes the behaviors won't go well. And I'll dive into that a little bit more as we go through the behaviors, but keep in mind that it is as a personal reflection item, something that I personally practice on a daily basis is to look at your tree as your personal person, not looking at other people to judge other people, but as yourself, is an extremely beneficial and powerful thing to do in terms of changing the game. But to move on, we're going to be talking about the 13 ways to build trust. Now, this is all 13 of them, and we are going to go through them one by one. But what I want you to do is I'm going to stop a couple of times as we're going through these. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the Q&A section. Shervin's going to gather those for me, and I'm going to stop a couple of times to see if there have been any questions that I can answer before moving on. So to start at the very, very top, we've got talk straight. Talk straight, and the behaviors go from kind of easiest to hardest. So talk straight is objectively one of the easiest behaviors to do. The key factor in talk straight in particular is going to be, this does not mean to just say it like it is. This doesn't mean, hey, whenever you're in a meeting, it doesn't matter who's in the meeting, you need to say what's on your mind. It comes with a whole bunch of other consideration of how does this person like information, hard information to be received, and is this the right time to give this information? But when you do it, don't beat around the bush. Don't try to do 1,000 hints and hope that they get the picture. Say it like it is. Talk straight when appropriate. Following right on its heels is demonstrate respect. Now, these behaviors rely on each other. Now, I really like that talk straight and demonstrate respect come right after each other, because demonstrate respect kind of finishes talk straight. So if at any point in time I feel like there is a difficult subject and I want to talk to you about it, I'm going to be a little bit nervous probably, and I'll sit down with you like, hey, I have something that I need to tell you. Now, if I do this in a way that also demonstrates respect, oftentimes that comes across a lot better, obviously, than it would otherwise. But this goes back to intent, right? If my intent in the Talk Straight conversation is to help better you and better me and better our team versus to remove the frustration, right? Knowing which one I'm trying to deal with will change how I come across to the other person at the other end. But then Talk Straight also goes back to the Scrum values. It goes back to courage. Sometimes it takes courage to say that thing that nobody else is saying, and then demonstrate respect. Respect is also one of the values. So these are pretty tightly aligned in how the different verbs or the different words come together. Next, we have create transparency. Create transparency is an interesting and a slightly controversial behavior in my experience, where people are like, well, I can't always be transparent because that's too risky. In general, we're not asking you here to take all of the hidden items, all of the sensitive information, and put it all out on the internet. That's not at all what we're talking about. What we're talking about is creating an environment by which you're not hiding things, right? So in Scrum, you have the sprint review in which it's creating transparency into the team's progress on a regular cadence. The Scrum meeting, the 15 minutes in the morning, is creating transparency on the results and how you're doing on your stories on a day-to-day basis. There's a whole bunch of practices inside of Scrum that are targeted at effective transparency to help remove the stressors, help remove the nag that people feel that they need when they don't feel they're getting that loop closed for them. And this goes to the Scrum values of openness, right? Openness and transparency are similar, not necessarily the same. And then we have right wrongs. Right wrongs, again, goes back to courage. But interestingly enough, when you talk about right wrongs, specifically I want to talk about, it's not just when you admit that you're wrong, right? Oh, I created a bug in the system, I was wrong. No, it's you were in the wrong. Let's say you made a commit that was a merge conflict and you didn't collaborate with that other teammate, and you're like, well, it's cool, I got there first. That's not really what we're talking about here, because, well, that is what we're talking about here, I'm sorry. When you're righting wrongs, it's showing people that you care about the commitment that you missed, that you care about stepping on their toes, that you care about them as people. And so oftentimes I get the question of like, okay, I missed a commitment yesterday. I told somebody that I would get that email to them and I didn't. Is righting the wrong just sending that email this morning, or is it more than that? And the answer is it's more. There are generally a few parts to a good apology in this sense, and it is acknowledging the wrong directly. It is acknowledging the impact of the wrong. So for example, if you know that because you missed that email that they weren't able to send out a report to their boss and therefore they missed a commitment, acknowledging that and acknowledging the impact that you had on it and then correcting it. So there's 3 parts to any good apology there. Are there any questions so far, Shervin?
Not yet, Robyn. I'm sure they're coming.
Next, we have show loyalty. When you talk about loyalty, oftentimes it's in spite of the business type thing. Like, I'm loyal to you even though it's not beneficial for X, Y, and Z. And that's not really what we're talking about here either. This is more about being who you are to somebody's face as you are behind their back, right? If you are caught talking poorly about somebody, even if it's in a beneficial format, if you're not willing to say that to their face, then maybe you should question your intent. So this again goes back to integrity and intent in your own personal character, because that's what will come into question in those situations. So if you're not willing to say it to their face, bringing that back to yourself and saying, why? Is it because I need to have more courage? When it goes back to the Scrum values, is that because maybe this doesn't actually need to be shared, or I'm just frustrated? And figuring out the answer to that before bringing that subject up. Say, for example, a teammate is not following the Scrum process and is, working off on stuff that isn't even captured in stories. Bringing that to the Scrum Master or the product owner. What's your intent there? Have you talked to that developer? Have you asked them what's going on? Have they figured out? Have you shown them that you genuinely care about them? And and being who you are to them as you would be to somebody else. Next, we have deliver results. This in a way comes into both commitment and focus when it comes to the Scrum values, where focusing on the best thing to be doing, the priority item in the list, saying, yes, I'm going to do that thing and make sure that the priority is set correctly and I am working on that and getting that done in order. This goes back to the scattered Scrum of people going and doing the high top of mind bug versus the sprint commitment. So delivering results takes understanding the stakeholders, understanding the users, and making sure that you're working with the product owner to prioritize the backlog and get that done in top-down order, using the sprint review time or the backlog grooming time to make sure that there aren't any missing pieces and that we're hitting the nail on the head here. Deliver results also talks a lot about, it's results, not activity, right? And so in Scrum, are you talking about all the things that you did yesterday, or are you actually talking about what you accomplished? I can't tell you the number of Scrum meetings that I've been in that turn into status meetings, and it's a natural behavior to go into you wanting to show that you're working hard. But ultimately, when you're delivering results, you're making small commitments, and you're meeting them, you're actually looking better than you would of a list of 15 items long of the things that you did. There's an interesting dynamic there where saying one thing that you accomplished often beats out 15 things that you did in a day. Next, we have get better. I work at a company called Improving, so we like to laugh at this behavior a little bit like, oh yeah, we all get better, that's our name. But in reality, this is an intentional process where you spend time every single day bettering yourselves, whether that's soft skills or technology skills or in just understanding yourself better, self-awareness, those types of things. There's a phrase, resting on your laurels, which actually comes from the ancient Greek games, where the crown where you win the games is a wreath of laurel, is what it is. And so resting on your laurels is basically saying, I've arrived, I'm good enough, I don't need to keep learning. But continuing to learn and continue to get better, especially in a technology-based world, is important because you're going to get left behind otherwise. You're going to be behind the times and in a technology that will die ridiculously quickly. So continuing to get better and continuing to learn and grow and be open to learning, being open to receiving feedback and asking for honest feedback on a regular basis. We have Confront Reality. The elephant in the room absolutely applies as an analogy for this behavior. You're talking about, okay, there is a real problem that we have in our team with morale. How do we address that? Right, this absolutely goes right into the value of courage, into the Scrum values. But there is a tactfulness, a need for demonstrating respect and talking straight and all these other behaviors while you're confronting reality, while you're bringing up the hard topics, but not being afraid of addressing the core issue, not continuing to solve symptoms instead of the real problem here. Now, one that goes very closely with Scrum is clarifying expectations. You talk about acceptance criteria, you talk about backlogs, you talk about stories and tasks and features and epics and etc. And you're really talking about how do we give the team the expectations of what we need to deliver. But then there's also sprint goals and objectives and all those things, which are like expectations of the results as a whole on a more meta level, I guess. And so at the end of each sprint, did we meet the expectation? Do we miss the expectation? How do we make sure that we set better expectations next time? Continuing to learn and grow and utilizing that get better strategy of saying we are going to continue to learn every single day from our experiences yesterday. We're going to continue to understand how to better detail out these stories. We're going to continue to understand how to hit what the stakeholders want as we understand them better. And clarifying expectations is an iterative process, just like Scrum. We have practice accountability. I can say that this behavior is probably, at least for me personally, one of the hardest behaviors to do really well, because I can all day long say, yes, I'm accountable for everything. I'm just going to take all of the blame and, wear the world on my shoulders. But that doesn't help anybody. That is, once you set the expectations for your team, once you've told them, hey, these are acceptance criteria, this is the definition of done, this is all the things that we want to do. And if it's missed, it's sitting down with them and walking back through that process. And again, this is done with demonstrating respect and talking straight and all of these other things combined into it. But it's hard because you feel like the bad guy. But keep in mind, when you're talking about practicing accountability, is you're really giving and capitalizing on an opportunity for growth for yourself and for the people that you're talking to. So if you miss that opportunity, you're honestly stealing that not only away from yourself, but away from them. Ultimately, we want to know what we're doing wrong so we can do it better. And being that person can suck, but it's ultimately one of the most beneficial things that you can do inside of a team. And showing that openness and that courage and all of those other values that tie into Scrum in practicing accountability with your team, making sure we're hitting definition done, making sure we're fighting for our sprint goal, all of those things. Any questions, Shervin?
Robyn, we got 2.
Okay.
So the first one is, if you work in an environment that lacks trust and you can't get an organization or department-wide process on trust started, what can you suggest someone do on an individual or small scale level to help improve it? Anything specific?
Yes, I believe that the most powerful way to introduce trust to any organization is to start with yourself. Now, this might sound like a cop-out answer, but I mean this to my core. Where you practicing these behaviors, you become the difference that you want to see in your organization. You start talking straight to your leaders. You start demonstrating respect to everybody around. You start not only demonstrating respect in the sense that you're being respectful, but also that you're defending other people's honor in a conversation. You're showing that courage and etc. You can start being a notable difference in your organization, which builds influence, it builds leadership, it builds all these other things that help you then move the people around you because you become magnetic. People are like, I trust this person. I'm going to ask them how do they do it. Now, that could be done intentionally through, hey team, I think this is something that can really help us. Let's all do a practice or a book club or anything like that together. And you'll get some buy-in, and that might be a way to help scale that. But ultimately, it starts with the individual.
I lied earlier. We actually have 2 additional ones. So
Okay.
The second one is, if you think your office will never embrace trust or will always lack trust, is it a must that you leave ASAP?
I would question the never. And I would say that that's probably an exploratory conversation of, is it because the value system doesn't align? Now, I believe on a very personal level that when you're looking to work for a company, you're looking to work for a company that aligns with the value system. Do the company's values align with yours? And if there's a mismatch there, then maybe it's time to consider leaving. But if they have a value system that says that they care about their people and they care about trust and these things and they're not living into it, have you had the conversations with them? Have you asked them what's going on? Are they aware that's your perception? And is there a way to build that relationship with those people and not only solve it for yourself, but for others who might share that perspective with you? And it's a hard conversation and a hard set of conversations to have. But I don't think the answer is just hands down, yeah, leave.
And the third question is, what are some simple trust practices that programmers can do when working with QA? It seems there's a natural rift between testers and coders.
There is oftentimes a natural rift between testers and coders. That is very true. I have found that oftentimes that rift is created by a you versus me type mentality. Now, genuine care takes care of a lot of that in terms of if you're working with a QA and you show them, I genuinely care about you and thank you for helping me make a better product, because ultimately that's what we're doing. We're working together to create something great. And QA isn't there to bash the developers and to point out fault and those types of things. And if that's how they're coming across, maybe an honest conversation makes sense there. But every time that QA brings up a bug of something that you created, the answering and simply like, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for catching that, because that helps us build something better. That can create a team dynamic that completely flips that on its head. And honestly, just that thank you by itself is, I found to be very powerful with that dynamic in particular.
Robyn, we had another one trickle in while you're discussing QA, but this one is micromanaging by a product manager a form of distrust in relationship to the Scrum team, because PMs are outside the traditional Scrum role?
That's an interesting question. I'm actually going to put that one off for a little bit, because we're going to get into one of the behaviors that we haven't covered yet that's going to talk a little bit about that. So Shervin, if I don't touch on that when I talk about extend trust, please pull me back on it, but I do want to talk about that at that point.
Okay.
Is that all of them?
That's it for now.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are going to be in the last 3 behaviors. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the earlier behaviors are the easier ones, and they grow in complexity over time. So the last 3 are going to be the most complex, and they require the most of the other behaviors to be right to make them successful. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time diving into these. And I'm going to start with listen first. I'm pretty sure most people have heard of in their lifetime the phrase active listening, where you maybe emulate body language and you make sure you're looking at them and you aren't distracted by your phone or your watch, your email, or what have you. But it goes a little bit deeper than that. Now, if you haven't seen the video, The Nail on the Head, on YouTube, I highly recommend going and watching that video. Not only is it funny, but it really drives this point home. In that example, it's a typical husband and wife relationship where the wife has a literal nail sticking out of her head, and the guy is trying to tell her, you have a nail in your head, and she's like, I just want you to listen. The core of this behavior is that people at a very basic level just want to feel heard. And so if they're coming to you with a problem and they start explaining it to you and you start telling them what the solution is before they get a chance to finish explaining it, you're going to end up in a situation where they don't feel like you understand the problem, or they think they're going to get a perception where they assume that you don't think they're very intelligent or not intelligent enough to see the most obvious thing to you. So spending the time and really showing that genuine care through listening and being present all the time is what we're after here. And it's really hard to do. I heard a story one time where a friend of mine, she was a teacher at a school, and she had, in her time at this particular school, she had 2 different principals. And these 2 happen to have very similar personality styles and communication styles between the 2 of them. She noticed that she trusted one significantly more than she trusted the other. And she noticed that the difference was whenever she asked a question, they would answer her question while they walked away, versus standing there, giving them full attention, answering the question, and asking at the end of each one whether or not the question had been answered to the full understanding of the question. And she said that very subtle difference was the maker or breaker in a huge amount of trust that she gave to one versus the other. When it comes to relationships, when it comes to making people feel like you care, this one is huge. And so I highly recommend, if you haven't really given this a lot of thought, to walk through, like, what are the last couple of meetings that I've had and how have I done it listening? Have I gotten distracted by that email, or did somebody ping me in the middle of it and I wasn't really paying attention? Did I turn off my video because I don't actually want to pay attention to this meeting? Those types of things. And in a virtual world, doing this one deliberately is so much more important, because there's so many more distractions just right at our fingertips. But this one also, and comes back to the Scrum values, it goes back to respect. Absolutely. Now we have keep commitments. This is very much a say what you're going to do what you say, like, just do it. Always follow through. Now, whenever you're dealing with a brand new team, this is one of the accelerators in trust that I often see, where we want to make that big, audacious goal and say, yes, we can do that thing. And then maybe it doesn't happen all the time. Maybe it takes longer than they anticipated. Maybe a lot of things happen in the middle, but making little bitty commitments, saying, hey, I'm going to get this in your inbox in the next 3 hours and getting it in 2, right? Making commitments you absolutely know you can make and you know that you can probably beat. That way you're always better than what they expect. And so this is one of those focus and commitment items from the Scrum values of making sure that you are intentional about your commitments too. So this is making sure that when somebody asks something of you, you're not amorphous about it. So say, for example, my product owner comes and says, hey, how hard do you think this story is going to be? And I was like, hey, I'd have to look into that, but I'll let you know. Now, that I'll let you know to me could mean the end of the week. To him could mean an hour. So being intentional about your language and saying, hey, I'll have that to you by the end of the day. Does that work? And making sure to have those conversations and hitting all of those. Now, oftentimes I believe that we are really good at overcommitting. Just as humans, we like to say yes to things. We like to do the things that are important. And there's nothing that's inherently wrong with that desire, but making sure that you are setting yourself up for success. And then if you're a team lead, making sure that you're setting your team up for success. Are you committing to a release date before consulting them? Are you communicating releases with stakeholders before you've had the chance to actually understand what all needs to be done before that happens? Those types of things. And last but absolutely not least, we have extend trust. Now, this goes back to that question that we got, where extending trust doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to let go, or everybody should always, you should trust me. I know what I'm doing. Just let go and go away. Extending trust means taking an objective look at the risk involved in the situation and the credibility and capability of a person, and doing a balancing act, saying, is this a good match? Or is there a subset of this that I can extend trust, or is there whatever? And taking the elements that you can extend and extending that as you would a pencil, like you're extending it and saying, hey, this is for you, and letting go. So back to that micromanagement question, yeah, in general terms, micromanagement is the lack of extension of trust, kind of. Oftentimes what I find is that the person who's extending the trust, or the person who's delegating, does trust the person to get it done, but hasn't set up the systems by which to close the communication loop. That way they have all the information they need to do their job. Say, for example, you have a product owner who has to trust their team to get a certain epic done. Now, let's say the product owner's boss comes and says, okay, so how are they doing? If the product owner doesn't know the answer to that question, they're not going to look very good. So they need to set up the systems by which that communication and the visibility comes back to the product owner. And so that's part of the sprint ceremony's purpose. That's part of the transparency and releases and Scrum and all of these things. Sprint reviews and all of that. And so without that system set up, that would have to be set up in some other way, some type of an agreement. Now, if you have a manager, and this happens pretty often in the world today, where you have your product owner, or maybe you don't, and you have some type of project manager who needs information, and his role is to manage maybe multiple teams, maybe one team. Now, if you feel like they're micromanaging you, the question could easily there be, hey, what cadence do you need this information? How can I help you have this information before having to come ask me for it? And oftentimes questions like that can lead to higher trust because they know you care. You care about their job as well as your own job. And it's not just about, hey, get out of my way. It's, hey, we're all here again for the same purpose. We're all here to build something cool. How do we help each other do that effectively and in a way that creates the visibility needed for you and for me? And I hope that answered that question thoroughly. But to dive a little bit deeper into extending trust, I was talking about that balance point, right? Now, when you take that balance point between, hey, should I extend trust? Does it make sense in this situation? There are 4 different kind of quadrants you can end up in. There is you never did that analysis and you're not going to extend trust, and that's just no trust. There's you're going to analyze it all day long, but doesn't matter what your analysis results in, you're still not going to extend the trust, and that's distrust. Then there's I'm not even going to look at it. I'm just like to trust people. no matter what, that is blind trust. And then the sweet spot that we're looking for here is the thorough analysis of the capabilities of people, the risk involved, deciding to trust or to not, and following through on that decision. Letting go afterwards, giving the boundaries, giving the accountability and the expectations, and demonstrating respect, all of the other behaviors all boiled up into one nice little bucket and handing it over. All right, and that's all 13 behaviors there. And I know that's a lot of kind of just spewing information. Are there any other questions, Shervin?
I do. I have another question for you.
Okay.
It says, I'm afraid of being truthful about things I observed in my team and department because of what it could cause in my career advancement. I feel I will be looked at as someone who rocks the boat or isn't falling in line. I'm afraid that being brave will lead me to being the black sheep or worse. Any suggestions?
I do have a suggestion. I would actually want to ask you what your career goals are there. Oftentimes, the fear of rocking the boat, the fear of being the person that shakes the waves, is maybe not matched up with what people want. Because as a leader inside of a company, I personally do want people to rock the boat, but not in the sense that they're going to stand in the sign and say you must make this change, but to say, hey, I think the onboarding process maybe could be better, right? And if you approach those conversations not in a way where you're standing and you're saying, I know these things are wrong and we must fix these things, but you come with curiosity. And you come saying, hey, can you help me understand the reasons behind these processes? Can you help me understand the reasons behind this structure? You'll oftentimes be met with a lot more grace. And then once you earn that trust with the people you're talking about, the conversations of how to change things can happen more naturally. And there's a lot less risk there because, again, the trust helps mitigate that rather significantly. So I guess my primary answer there is just ask a lot of questions. And then maybe that leads to better conversations, better understanding for you. Maybe it changes your perspective. Or maybe you ask the right questions, it changes their perspective, and you make a massive positive change for the company. Both of those are good things. Any other questions?
That's all we got right now.
Cool. Thank you, Shervin. So we talked about the pillars the Scrum pillars. Ultimately, I do believe that Scrum relies on trust. We talked about how all of the values align with the behaviors. There's an ability to kind of dissect those and break them down and figure out how we do them. And again, I highly encourage, if this is something where you're like, hey, yeah, none of those really surprised me. I'll say right now that everybody I know can grow in every single one of those behaviors. I've been working with this material for several years now, and I still continue to learn nuances and different ways that these things get applied on a daily basis. But if you make trust the focus and the team the focus and the people the focus and that genuine care, Scrum just works. Now, if you get to a point where you've turned around an environment to a high trust environment, you'll see tons of other benefits. You'll see people are 50% more productive, 76% more engaged at work, 60% enjoy their jobs more, 106% more energetic at work, and 88% recommend their company. That's insane numbers to me. But it's possible. It's not easy, and it's not rocket science, but it's absolutely possible. So the secret's out of the box. Now, if you don't remember what this picture is from, this is a guy who made glitter bombs out of apple boxes during Christmas time, when a bunch of his Apple products that were getting delivered were getting stolen. So he created glitter bombs, and every time that it got stolen, they would get glitter bombed in their car or their house or what have you. It was quite entertaining. Another video you can find on YouTube if you haven't seen it. So as a wrap up, if you have any questions, any remaining questions that you'd like to go through, or if there's any more right now, I'll talk through them. But feel free to send me an email. There's my email right on the screen, robyn.fuentes@improving.com. I would love to get in touch with you, or find me on LinkedIn, and we can continue conversation and talk through maybe your specific situation. Are there any other questions to address right now, Shervin?
No, that's all, Robyn.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you guys joining me here today and listening to me talk about Scrum and trust. And again, feel free to reach out if you'd like to continue the conversation in any way. And Shervin, do you want to?
Thank you all for attending. I will, Robyn. Thank you. Thank you all for attending today's virtual Lunch and Learn. And Robyn, thank you very much for sharing trust, the secret ingredient in Scrum. The recording of this session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, please locate the session for Improving's virtual events page. And while you're at the virtual events page, be sure to register for future Lunch and Learn sessions.